Day 5 of the Novena to St. Philip, May the 21st, Philip's tenderness of heart. Philip could not endure the very sight of suffering, and though he abhorred riches, he always wished to have money to give in alms. He could not bear to see children scantily clothed, and did all he could to get new clothes for them. Oppressed and suffering innocence troubled him especially. When a Roman gentleman was falsely accused of having been the death of a man, and was imprisoned, he went so far as to put his cause before the Pope, and obtain his liberation. A priest was accused by some powerful persons, and was likely to suffer in consequence. Philip took up his cause with such warmth that he established his innocence before the public. Another time, hearing of some gypsies who had been unjustly condemned to hard labor, he went to the Pope and procured their freedom. His love of justice was as great as his tenderness and his compassion. Soon after he became a priest, there was a severe famine in Rome, and 6 loaves were sent to him as a present. Knowing that there was in the same house a poor foreigner suffering from want of food, he gave them all to him, and had for the first day nothing but olives to eat. Philip had a special tenderness towards artisans, and those who had a difficulty of selling their goods. There were 2 watchmakers, skillful artists, but old and burdened with large families. He gave them a large order for watches, and contrived to sell them among his friends. His zeal and liberality specially shone forth towards poor girls. He provided for them when they had no other means of provision. He found marriage dowries for some of them. To others he gave what was sufficient to gain their admittance into convents. He was particularly good to prisoners, to whom he sent money several times in the week. He set no limits to his affection for the shrinking and bashful poor, and was more liberal in his alms towards them. Poor students were another object of his special compassion. He provided them not only with food and clothing, but also with books for their studies. To aid one of them, he sold all his own books. He felt most keenly any kindness done to him, so that one of his friends said, "You could not make Philip a present without receiving another from him of double value." He was very tender towards brute animals. Seeing someone put his foot on a lizard, he cried out, "Cruel fellow, what has that poor animal done to you?" Seeing a butcher wound a dog with one of his knives, he could not contain himself, and had great difficulty in keeping himself cool. He could not bear the slightest cruelty to be shown to brute animals under any pretext whatever. If a bird came into the room, he would have the window opened that it might not be caught.
The narrative sections of the Novena to St. Philip were drawn from the classic Life of the Saint, written by Father Bacci of the Roman Oratory for the canonization of St. Philip in 1623. In his short chapter on St. Philip's compassion and tenderness of heart, Bacci devotes half of its length to the saint's kindness to animals. He introduces this section in these words: "The tenderness of the saint's heart was not confined to the human race, but flowed over even upon animals in whom he loved to contemplate the Creator." It would seem that there was something unusual and distinctive about St. Philip's kindness to animals. His sensitivity and even anger about cruelty shown to animals was noted by his friends and disciples as setting him apart from most people of his times. We need to remember that at that time, the modern cult of pets had not yet developed. Dogs and cats had their uses, but were not pampered except in some upper-class homes. Animals that caused annoyance or got in the way were often treated brutally. St. Philip very rarely got angry, but cruelty to animals seems to have been one thing he could not bear. People were surprised that he even reprimanded those who stomped on lizards. We know a lot more about his empathy for the sick and the poor, but it was taken as a sign of the depth of his compassion for his fellow creatures that his tender-heartedness extended also to animals. In fact, St. Philip did have a pet, inasmuch as a cat can be regarded as a pet, since cats really own their humans. Philip was very fond of his cat, but when he was forced to move to the new house and church of the Oratory, the cat remained behind. However, the saint was very concerned about the cat, and he sent one of his favorite disciples, a priest of the Oratory, every day to see that the cat was being properly fed. When Father Gallonio, the future biographer of St. Philip, returned, Philip would inquire how the cat was and what she had eaten, even when cardinals and other important persons were there with him. Thus, his care for the cat also served another spiritual purpose of humbling Gallonio and making important people think how silly and ridiculous Philip was. The dog named Capriccio, who deserted his owner, Cardinal Santafiore, to hang around St. Philip, served a similar purpose when he made his star disciple Tarugi, a relative of two popes, carry Capriccio in his arms as they walked through the streets. Animals are adept at detecting sympathy in human beings and often reciprocate. However, the saints often seem to have a prelapsarian relationship with animals, as if around them there is restored something of the original amicable peace of the earthly paradise. The early desert fathers, like St. Anthony and St. Jerome, had lions tamely lying at their feet, and St. Francis had his wolf and his birds. With St. Philip, it was mostly the birds. Sometimes people brought him small birds, and he would tell them to let the birds go free, although if the birds were young, he would worry about whether they could survive outdoors. One time a disciple brought him 2 small songbirds in a cage. When this disciple returned later on, he found St. Philip lying in bed due to some illness, but the cage was open, and one of the birds was flutting around Philip's face and singing as if to comfort him. Philip asked him whether he had trained the bird to do this, but Louis said no. Philip drove him away, but he kept returning to him. That is, the bird returned to him. Finally, he told Louis to offer the cage to the bird, and immediately the bird went in quietly, as if he were consciously obeying the saint. Isn't that cute? Well, yes. Why not? But the point is, the real purpose of this lovable gift of an all-embracing tender-heartedness was to draw creatures to the loving embrace of their Creator. With his tender-hearted compassion, St. Philip drew the poor and the infirm, the innocent and the sinner to himself, and taught them to love God better. He was especially gentle and kind with sinners, gradually bringing them back to God. As Cardinal Newman, St. John Henry, that is, calls him in the litany, St. Philip is the winning saint. He knows how to win our souls for Christ through his droll charm and his human sympathy that captured the hearts of both man and beast.
Philip, my glorious advocate, teach me to look at all I see around me, after thy pattern, as the creatures of God. Let me never forget that the same God who made me made the whole world, and all men and all animals that are in it. Gain me the grace to love all God's works for God's sake, and all men for the sake of my Lord and Savior, who has redeemed them by the cross. And especially let me be tender and compassionate and loving towards all Christians, as my brethren in grace. And do thou, who on earth was so tender to all, be especially tender to us, and feel for us. Bear with us in all our troubles, and gain for us from God, with whom thou dwellest in beatific light, all the aids necessary for bringing us safely to him and to thee.